you create an app for the friends and then with this churches. This was not working actually. The landing page. I had some trouble with the.
Cool.
Nice to meet you.
CSS. And yeah, but I think it was a win.
Hi, Sweta.
It was crazy because I knew about it and I think something that yeah, like why would it just started like already 40 hours ago. And I saw, yeah, and I came like to send something. That was my first time. And I did it because I needed to know how I happened before I go. That was exactly what we were I came and, well, I wouldn't say that I almost made that. It's complicated. I like that first year. I mean, not really bad. I think we had the same problem. I come here and like this. And I made a fun itself. When they serve you, and then they were saying when they were presenting like that meditation, how do you get you know, like so you have like the fire and the CO2 combined with water. It's probably the most you have that way of found and I think may never consider that. And then, what I wanted to know was afterwards if there's one company that says and they sell them. They probably it's not very famous. Probably but they sell them. They use Well, originally I was born here, but I was raised in Mexico. So actually all my life I was in Mexico. So like,
You're one of the worst people.
yes, yeah, it's not very common. And I really never wanted to come here. All my friends were saying, why don't you go to work? You can do it. I said, but eventually it happened, and it was not a problem for me. Uh, I know how you struggle. She's Fernando. She's a stage gardener. I'm looking for an idea but now you see that compensation. We need to just make sure somehow that she can hear it.
I want to yeah, just close your eyes and follow it.
Yeah, I don't think that like
Nice to meet you.
always a topic. I'm an American, but legally I am not. And even when they were talking about it, that they said they were talking about it, and then they couldn't say you have to legally, I'm not in the border. But in the border trade is a big process. Well, I will tell you what, but they were talking about Well, she's like probably around 45. So this was when she was around 30. She's almost figured out. She's okay. So they would go in the road to they reach the wall. The wall was not higher than I stand up problem. So when you like, okay, well, take up this crop, yes, it goes that far, we need to so this guy went to the customs, and then he went to well, well, none of those guys, it was like, where are we going? We were from Italy. Like, this is a long expense.
How are you doing? I know you're somewhere.
Yeah, I was telling her like, I want to know you that person.
Oh, really? Well, it depends, right? It's more like before well, before that, your face is familiar.
I'm a better summer.
Okay.
You know summer? Yeah, probably.
No, but
No, probably not. Normally I go to the museum. I have been in several things, right? Probably to yeah, and I like so some of us say so like you're Portuguese and I say German. No, no, that's not.
oh,
Yeah, if you go to the very end, you see of stuff. You just go to the east, the first city will be the same level. Where the I heard that sometimes like the people from North Australia, like they struggle with they are in trouble with
well, we had a war. Some factory there. The economic issues are bigger than
yeah. Well, I read it recently, like there was like finally an agreement.
oh yeah, yeah. So there was after the war, there was warning for go aligned by whatever. Probably that's so we have this mostly the line to be so there was a judicial agreement on the line. They was saying, no, this is a fishing agreement, and they no, but this is just fishing is also like functional agreement, right? The agreement is that's why they yeah, now it's that go align like this. Like in the video, there are like 200 miles. A month. 100 miles they go like.
I don't know how that works, but there is one what's the big probably.
And it's mainland.
Well, it's in the coast. I mean, if you, what I say is that if you go towards mainland, you like the first city you will.
Oh, but it's not cold.
I didn't work like all the way down to Chile, Peru, Ecuador.
Maybe it's international because but the problem is that that's a practically border. If you're interested, you will see much bigger.
So you have to probably use
Well, if you have or you do it just like they are already so you already
Shaman, I said Shaman. I don't know how to program it, but if you like it, it's something that
wait, so this is you
no, it was one.
oh that's
Yeah, but the funny thing is that I was born for 4 months, no, 6 months old, and I was back. So it was so little, I just couldn't do all the paperwork, like get the stamp, blah, blah, blah. Once I was in Mexico, she said, well, let's do this again. She said that he was born instead of the hospital, like say, he was grandparents.
I guess that also because of the problems.
Well,
But maybe not for you because you might be
well, no, like I like all my life. And every time I think birth certificate, like one old one. Like when I came, I said, well, I want to get my birth certificate, and then it was really old. Nobody actually. Well, right now, when you step on the public, maybe you will.
here.
Yeah. But in those times, like, you could go and you could just get it. But for me, we did a research that paperwork we are on.
Oh,
And then at the end, well, there's a basic. Oh,
there?
just the paperwork to be able to what I mean, 1 year, 6 months, just all this they have to train. And if I would it was only get one price.
That's how it works. I feel very good. I like my months. It's like 5 minutes. Yeah. That's yeah. It was then I saw yeah. All programs it's interesting that you like bring letters in that the name is very hard. So what do you are not thinking about?
No, that's more like a product management. And yeah, the company I was working for is like giving me a lot of trouble. All the developers are like trying I'm like the facility with the office. But all the developers are we had one. Yeah, we did one, but most of them are projects. There is only one that that we have a potential partnership with. So we are preparing some use cases. I mean, so we will make this guy the partnership. Then we'll put easily bring it here. Also do it in so it's all but it's working.
Yeah, especially B2B, right?
Yeah, and that's right. It's you know when you I don't know if you wrote like someone do register what you say. And then when it's that's milestones.
Oh yeah.
And then well they will think out that it's so you go back to the website, you will have your time, and probably you will be able to take out.
What are you up to?
Paper with time.
Nothing general. Are you busy with?
Oh. Then basically trying to take time to kind of grab
I work.
the board. And there are many custom but sometimes
What do you do?
sponsor. You go to the website, organize it, but then the payment you need to to the sponsor or buy
What do you work?
and then our website you need to
Okay.
the payment. So it's like so what we do is that we put everything in one place. And in order like not to go to a different website,
What
we
What are you making?
yeah, it's couple of pages. You will have your events with your own CSS. So you make the space in your HTML, you will use your CSS. It would look like it's actually a meeting. Except for the URLs, right? And the whole thing started was one of the models so they would be somehow a way to they started iterating tried to take after this idea. And, yeah, this guy liked it. That's very right now for us what we done $6,000. And do something like this. And what we say is
So what did you do?
we will sacrifice this where you get the great. We will be so it's very user. It's product that's okay. And we right now work with and the guy already found us a friend from another side of the country. He was very so that's cool. And it also works. Then the next step is to do the partnership with the chip manufacturer. Because they don't have
So this is like a
well, they do. They have like
basically a discount model. What?
but it's
What's
also
the stop of
the
Wuhan?
time. But we need to do the registration. Right. So we see somebody last year. They like it. So well, once you have it, so that's the strategy. We have a couple of examples that I already put. They go to them and ask what you like it. It doesn't happen then.
Have you guys launched?
Yeah, this is actually just what is the weekend? You just put information on people
Got it.
Facebook.
Stores on
But
board?
normally the website that those people use is like so long. For example, one day just to explain the science for what it is. It's a location. Something in your
How's that be?
Well, this is the first one, so we are.
I was looking for rotation. One. At the end?
Yes, Lord. We're doing stuff with cars. The other day, so I was
Awesome. So you get to get paid for making it.
exactly. And sometimes it bothers me because I'm such a shipping software. That's classic. For them, I don't know.
Pretty cool. What was the game?
Well, honestly, once I tried already, yeah, maybe it would be the first
So,
one. Otherwise, I would
web applications that you're doing, or how does it kind of? Okay.
It's just, it's not really what
There's the music for experience. And the game was it wasn't
It's so frustrating. Only the answer. That's terrible. It's such a chair style. Why not right?
A lot of people would disagree. They'll say like, "Wow, work is turned into a real game. Everyone wants to turn work into a game. Now this is literally a video game." I'm running a startup to make sensing analytics of basically devices that do put on put them in a location, basically check the sensing parameter, physical sensing parameters. Well, I mean, it all depends like if what is that communication of the sensing so it depends on the application, but we want it to be a general sensing platform that covers 80% of sensing. So that let's say developers and people that don't want to deal with making that device, setting up all the infrastructure and the platform, getting all that data, processing it, basically all that backend into the physical sensing. We want to take care of that problem so that basically people can focus on their apps and worry about none of that. Just get let's say the sense data wherever they're using in their app as an API. Yeah, I work for bigger companies and over the past few years it's like startup and this thing. What is it? So doesn't that stay on for a while and then you get that work? So I have more wow. So, how long have you been here? For that. Oh, okay. Also, yeah. So it's yeah, it's you okay. Right. So how like let's look at TN. There. So
Well, the funny thing is that we made a basic
I better do a thing right now tonight.
So that's why I had to get it. Because they had to show that you were special. I might really
Right.
It's like
Interesting. And now you have to basically
yeah, everybody.
like what? Like you have to
No, so like No, I just from home while I work on the
Yes, Michael was nice. So,
exactly. So it's not like the worst thing. But then the weather sucks.
oh, wow. Better than minus 30. What's that? I in Alberta this
So
year.
you to get started? Hello? Do you guys hear me? The back?
At least we can see.
All right. Yes, can you hear me in the back? Hello? You can hear me? All right. Okay, so let's get started. Immigration, that is the topic for tonight. And I think for a foreign-born entrepreneur, if there's one thing which is stopping us to realize our dream, that is immigration issues. If you want to start a company, if you want to hire somebody from other country, if you know anything you want to think about a startup, you have to go through this particular hurdle of immigration. So, and this particular issue is very crucial, time consuming, and it has an aspect of uncertainty to it, which makes it very troublesome, as we all know. So thankfully we have Sweta Khandelwal tonight with us, who is going to demystify this problem to us and help us with our entrepreneurial journey. And but before that, what I want to do is I want to introduce myself. My name is Raj, and me with a few of the Stanford Ignite students, we started this meetup almost 8 months ago, and we were like 20 friends. We thought we'll just hang out together once a month and have some fun. And then this meetup now has like more than around 2,000 members. So it's been a very fun journey, and thanks to all of you for joining us. And we also have a startup called Workspace. We are trying to solve a distributed team problem. So if you are working on a startup which has a distributed team, and we are working on a beta, so you can go to this website and sign up for a beta if you're interested. Okay, so before I get to the next thing we have in the agenda, I want to thank you, all the volunteers and the co-organizer, especially Grace, Shailesh. Can I see some hands? Govind, Shailesh, Grace, where are you guys? They are outside. Okay, so they have been helping selflessly to make this event happen. Grace, along with me, Cynthia, and Wendy. Wendy is online right now. Hey, Wendy. So please have a round of applause for them. All right. So the next thing we are going to do is we are going to play our signature 6-word memoir game, which, if you have checked your email, what we are going to do is we want you to think about what is American dream for you in 6 words. And I think immigration is all about American dream, right? You come here, you want to realize your full potential, you want to start your startup, you want to change the world. Everything is starts from immigration. So I think it will be perfect for us to think about this for a while. I'll give you a few minutes. And I came up with something very interesting here. So this is the format of the game. You have to use 6 words only. and then you can use a hashtag American Dream, write a 6-word at workspace. And if you enter it here, so take out your mobile phones, and I hope you have a Twitter account. And think about it. I have a very good example which I thought of. Freedom to start and freedom to choose. That is like for all the startups, I think these are the two things we want. We want to start our startups and we want to choose our employees, make a great team. So, and if you enter for this game, your chances of winning is very high because we have got very few submissions. So this is the time you have next half or 1 hour to submit, and Wendy will be looking at those entries, and you'll get the 4 prizes, 4 amazing prizes waiting for you. So, okay, get started. Come on, I'll give you 1 minute, and then we'll start with the session. All the creative minds here, come on, think of something nice. I saw one very nice entry about this, which was related to a family, and I was really impressed by that person. He might get a prize today, but I want to see what all entries you guys can come up with. All right, creative minds, American Dream. All right, so I'll let you guys think a bit more, and then the next thing in our agenda today is immigration hacking, and a famous lawyer, Sweta Khandelwal, is here, and I know Sweta personally because I have spent hundreds of dollars to consult her, and I realized that she has a lot of information she can share with all of us. So I'll let her start her session, and please welcome Sweta Khandelwal. Yes. So I want to see your entries. Put this. All right.
So welcome friends to this session on US visa options for foreign entrepreneurs, your startups and employees. A little introduction about myself. I'm Sweta Khandelwal. I'm the principal attorney at Law Office of Sweta Khandelwal. I'm an immigrant myself. I came here on the H4 visa. I studied under F1. I interned under OPT. I worked on H1B. And now I'm self-employed as a permanent resident. So it was a long, arduous process. Exhausted pretty much all the visa options that I had to get here. And when I see clients, when I see people who have gone through what I did, what I tell them is been there, done that. So I'm an entrepreneur too. I have my own practice, not as what an entrepreneur is defined in the Valley, but yes, I still am. So now what is the objective of this session? So I have sort of a confession to make. I am not sure that this session will live up to its reputation of hacking through the complex web of US immigration laws. And I'm emphasizing on the word laws because it's not my idea to make attorneys out of tech enthusiasts and out of tech entrepreneurs, because I don't want to find myself out of a job. But what I really want to emphasize on is the importance of how small facts can actually change your immigration situation. So what appears to be like a seemingly insignificant fact to an entrepreneur or a business person can actually really alter your immigration situation and can change the US visa options that are available to you. So if there is just one thing that you must take away from this session, is that before you plan, strategize, or grow your business, keep the immigration consequences of everything in mind. And that's when you come to attorneys like us. So with that, let's kind of begin. So I've sort of grouped my presentation just broadly as we quickly go through all the the US visa options, both temporary visas and permanent visas, to see how they can best help you achieve your goals of starting, working for your own startup, hiring foreign nationals. I'll do a case study where we'll apply all that we've reviewed and see how that will affect the little fact patterns that I'll throw out there. This is important. Okay, so now the importance of immigration. I don't need to convince you guys how important U.S. immigration is to the U.S. economy. It's going to be like preaching to the converted. The contribution immigrants make to the economy and how important it is that these founders, these innovators, find a way to stay in the US, work for the company they've started, and take it to the next level. And then have, in turn, go back and hire top global talent. The relationship between USCIS and entrepreneurs. Now, USCIS is the government body that approves all these visa applications and petitions. And a couple of years ago, they came up with this Entrepreneurs in Residence initiative, where they actually publicly acknowledged that they are sympathetic towards the concern of entrepreneurs. They will view entrepreneurs in a different light as compared to traditional businesses. And they will sort of shift their policy when it comes to adjudicating petitions filed by entrepreneurs. Some of it is just promise, some of it is stuff that we've seen, and we'll just go on to show how best can we actually use this to our advantage. But what we have to remember essentially, that all these promises is like what I said, it's old wine in a new bottle. What it means is that the laws have not changed. The immigration laws, the code is still what it was so many years earlier. So we don't have a startup visa, we don't have an entrepreneur visa. But what we do have is we are trying to use and adapt those old visas for modern day businesses, especially businesses in the valley. We don't do business the traditional way, right? We don't have like a typical brick and mortar structure of doing business. So we have to use those same solutions, but just find a way of adapting them to our situation. So that comes to the approach. What should our approach be when we solve these issues for entrepreneurs like you? Just get creative and customize your solutions to your own fact pattern. If there is no one-size-fits-all remedy. There is no, as I say, a cookie-cutter approach to deal this. You just structure your businesses accordingly and plan really ahead and use your own fact pattern, your own unique fact pattern to your competitive advantage. The problem with this, all of this, is not surprising. There is a lack of standardization in applying laws. I mean, there is no black and white. It's gray all over. There is no situation, and the best of best attorneys should tell you this, that there is rarely when it comes to entrepreneurs, there is a one-size-fits-all, or there is a guarantee or an assurance that this will definitely work for you. And unfortunately, best immigration decisions are usually not good for business. That's the whole idea. I mean, you don't want to structure your business keeping the immigration requirements in mind. You would like to structure your business keeping the business requirements in mind, right? But unfortunately, that's where we have to draw a fine balance as to what will get you a visa and what will not. Again, for a takeaway, get creative, explore all visa options that are out there. There are really many more than you think. Be proactive and stay tuned and hope some immigration reform becomes a reality. But till then, we work with what we've got. So we'll now talk about some key non-immigrant work visas and mainly discuss 6 important non-immigrants, because these are temporary work visas. That's why we call them non-immigrant visas. We discuss 6 of them. They're relatively easier to obtain, quicker, and they are more economical as compared to permanent visas or green cards. The 6 that we will talk about are the B1 visa, and the visa waiver program, that's the visitors visa. Students, F1 OPT. Investors and your employees, E2 visas. Intercompany transfer L1s, and the professional worker or the H1B visa, and the extraordinary ability O1 visa. The B1 visa or the visa waiver program, it's pretty useful in the initial stages of your business. It's got very limited purpose and applicability. We'll talk about each of these in much more detail below. These visas do not allow you to be employed in the US, and they do not allow you to draw remuneration from a US company. Students have F1 and OPT options. OPT is the practical training part of the student visa. Students can get 12 months of practical training or work permits, and for students who are science, technology, engineering, or math, they get an additional 17 months of OPT. You can do full-time, part-time, have multiple jobs. There isn't a minimum wage requirement, but that's kind of a little tricky. We'll talk about it more. Investors and your employees are eligible for an E2 visa. Again, this visa is only available to nationals of certain countries. They're called treaty nationals, treaty countries. What it means is that US has to have a treaty of friendship, navigation, and commerce with that country for the nationals to get a visa. There are about 60, 70 countries, but India and China, US does not have a treaty with them. So E2 visas are not available for Indian and Chinese nationals. The foreign national can come either as an investor or manager or a critical employee of the company. At least 50% of the business must be owned by treaty nationals, and the business must be controlled by treaty nationals. The L1 is an existing foreign business can use the L1 to set up an affiliated business in the US. The employees or the foreign national who is the beneficiary of the visa must be employed overseas for at least 1 year out of the preceding 3 years. These visas can be managerial visas for managerial employees or visas for specialized knowledge workers. So it's the L1A and the L1B visa. The professional worker or the H1B visa, this particular visa is especially important timing-wise now, because as we'll see, the H1 visa has a limited number of visas that are available every year, and it is on April 1st when the annual quota opens. That means that's when the government starts accepting applications for H1 visas, and they only accept them till the visas are available. So it's usually about a couple of days that the application is expected to remain open. And the extraordinary ability visa. These are, as the name suggests, this visa is available for people who can be classified as extraordinary in their fields, who've achieved a sustained recognition and can be called as top of their field. And there is a certain criterion, and the foreign national must meet at least 3 of those criteria. So let's first talk about the temporary visa, the visitor visa for business, and the visa waiver program. We'll speak about both of them together. Now it's a visitor visa. It's the B1 visa, the most common visa that people use to visit the US either on business or for pleasure. The visa waiver program, as the name suggests, it's not a visa. 37 participating countries are allowed to participate in the program, and as long as you have a machine-readable passport, you can come to the US without a visa, so long as your stay is limited to 90 days. The purpose, whether you come on a B1 or a visa waiver program, is very limited, and I cannot emphasize this enough. It is only to negotiate contracts, attend meetings, conferences, conduct research, meet with investors, whatever. The visa, just a significant thing about the visa waiver program is, because it's really not a visa, anybody who's using it to enter the US cannot change his or her status to another status. So if you entered on a visa waiver program and you find yourself with a job, or you cannot change your status to, you have to leave the country, leave US, and then re-enter on the right visa. Whereas if you enter on a B1, you do find yourself with a job or something works out that requires you to change yourself to another status, you can change it from a B1 to that status without having to leave the country. So it's the key thing to eligibility requirement for you to get the visa is you must demonstrate non-immigrant intent. And you'll apply for this visa at the US consulate abroad, and the foreign national must demonstrate that he or she has no intent to immigrate to the US. You cannot be employed in the US, so you cannot use this. We see so many people, especially from Europe, who come for to start their own businesses. But the main thing that's kind of keeping them from making money, again, is you cannot run payroll. There is no way a company can run payroll for you if you're employed on the B1 visa. You cannot receive any remuneration. Most people think that as long as they don't receive remuneration, they are fine. They can continue to be here. But remuneration is just one of the yardsticks for determining whether or not you can be here and work. You cannot work for the company. So you might not be making any remuneration, but if you come here, say every couple of, stay here for 6 months, work and go back, there will be a time when you will be questioned at the port of entry. And at that point, if the officer determines that you've been coming here to work for a company, you're going to have some problems. So it's a great visa for the purpose that it is for. It's convenient, it's economical, it's quick to process, and it's, as long as you don't abuse it, it's a great option. You come, you meet people, you find your investors, find your co-founders, attend events, do whatever you want to do with it. But unfortunately, the biggest problem with this visa is the law itself is not clear as to what activities are permitted on the B1 and what are not. So it's the Foreign Affairs Manual which really lists all the activities as to what are permissible and what are not. And the manual, it's sort of a guidebook to the officers who are issuing the visas, and itself says that it's unclear as to what activity constitutes permissible employment and what does not. So just like it's actually an old but an established case. What happens is when a tailor is coming to take measurements and then goes back to the country and stitches the garment there, is that like something permissible on a B1 activity? Because, well, his client is here, he is working here, but he's kind of going back and sort of, so it's not a very relevant example for Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, but at least goes on to show that there are many activities that can really be questionable as to whether or not it is permissible on B1 or not. If your visa is denied, there's nothing really you can do except reapply. If you keep getting denied, that's bad news. The next is the student visa. I know there are a lot of students here on F1s and OPTs and have these whole questions on what can you do on OPT and what can you not. The OPT program is an optional practical training program that you get as incidental to your F1 visa status. It's done after you are completing the program, so either you have to be studying full-time, grad, undergrad, PhD, and in accredited school. Generally, there is no employment while the student is in school. There are situations or exceptions, but we won't discuss them here. They are not relevant at this point. Up to 12 months of training or work permits issued after completion of your academic program, an additional 17 months if you're a science, technology, engineering, or math graduate, and STEM extension, that is the additional 17 months of OPT, is only available if you are working for a company that is E-verified. You must complete your academic program successfully. Again, here I would stress the importance of not only an accredited school, but a reputed school. We've had, especially across the valley, we've had many unscrupulous schools which have got into trouble because their sole business proposition was to issue CPTs and OPTs to students, and they found themselves being investigated by ICE. So you want to stay out of those. The students cannot be out of job for more than 90 days while on OPT, otherwise he or she loses status. And the STEM extension, the 17-month extension that you apply for, must be timely, which means you must apply for it before your 12 months is expiring. It's a great option for startups. It's a great option for incubators, accelerators to hire people, students here, particularly because the wage requirement is not prohibitive. Now here there are a lot of issues about whether you can do unpaid work, internships, volunteer positions, stuff like that. I'm going to talk about them in a little bit. But there is no minimum. So unlike, we'll talk about the H-1B visa program, which has a prohibitively high wage for many startup companies. The wages are determined as per the job title and the location, and location being Santa Clara, being Silicon Valley, the startup wages are often very high for many people, many founders and co-founders and other small companies. So that is a great thing with the OPT, that it, as compared to the H-1B, the wage requirements are low. However, I have a couple of questions, which dealt with whether we can be unpaid or it can be a volunteer position or whatever. So now unpaid positions are allowed under OPT programs. The regulations, the manual that ICE issues, it specifies that you can get, but so long as it is in compliance with state employment laws. So immigration is a federal practice, but employments for each state is determined by their own individual state laws. So if you are working in California, you will see whether California allows workers unpaid or volunteer positions are permissible or not. I don't want to get into the part of employment practice because one, it's beyond my scope of the discussion here, but just enough to say that yes, unpaid, California does have a provision for unpaid interns, but there are very, very stringent requirements for what is an internship position. Okay, an internship position is supposed to benefit the intern, is not supposed to benefit the company. So as you really have to classify it, I mean, there are requirements, and you have, whether you are taking one or you're offering one, just and be sure that you meet that criterion of qualifying it as an internship position. And if nothing else, it's much, much cheaper to pay your intern than to pay an attorney later on to defend that whole business. So if you pay, if you have an internship position for 4 months and you end up paying $4,000 to the student, it'll cost you probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend a lawsuit against whether that position was paid, unpaid, intern, full-time, whatever. So just, it's like penny wise, pound foolish. The OPT has a cap gap problem which is solved. We'll again talk about it when we discuss the H1s, but essentially, now that we are approaching H1 season, that is the H1 cap for this year will officially open on April 1st. If your OPT period extends beyond April, okay, and you find that your employer is willing to sponsor your H1B in this current cap and you do get accepted, you can continue to work for your employer until October 1st, which is the earliest that a person can work on H1B. This makes sense. So essentially what happened is that, let's say you are on OPT, your employment authorization document is expiring sometime in May. But your employer has also filed for an H1B for you, and that H1 does not kick into effect until October 1st of 2014. So between April to October, you pretty much do not have any underlying work permit to continue working for your employer. Now, because of specific amendments to the laws a couple of years earlier, now you can continue to work for the same employer so long as your H1B was filed and accepted before your EAD expired. So for students, it's pretty important to remember you want to start your OPT as soon as possible, but it makes great strategic sense to start your OPT at least after the first week of April. Give your employer sufficient time to be able to file your H1B so that you can take the benefit of the quota. I know some students are so keen to start their OPTs that their OPT period begins on February. But what happens is, assuming that you have 1 year OPT, your OPT will expire next year, but the quota would not have opened by then. The quota would only open in April 1st. So you will miss out whole 8 months of employment with the employer, and maybe even an opportunity to continue at that job, right? So it's sort of important to structure that accordingly. There's nothing really that sucks about the OPT. It's a great option. You have 29 months of an EAD. You can actually, OPTs, self-employment is permitted while you're on OPT, which is why it is so helpful to startups and founders. You can actually start your own company while on OPT. The only thing is that if you are planning to use for 17-month STEM, make sure that your company is E-verified. E2, do we have, how many people from India, China here? Okay, European countries? Okay. So the E2 is a good option for, it's actually one of the few available options for entrepreneurs, particularly if you happen to be a national of a country with which the US has a treaty. So the complete list is on the Department of State website. You can check to see whether your country has a treaty with the US or not. The treaty nationals must own at least 50% of the business. Treaty nationals must control the business. The foreign national can be the investor, can be an executive, a manager, or a specialized knowledge employee. If the foreign national is also the investor, so you need not come only as an investor, you can come as an employee too, then in that case the foreign national must develop and direct the business. Generally, all nationals must be from the same country. If two nationalities are involved, which means if there are two people, business partners, each from a different treaty country, both must have equal ownership and control. But it doesn't. Now, what it takes to succeed, this is actually an exhaustive, I've tried to condense it as much as possible because what is most relevant to people here is equity and voting rights. But to quickly summarize them, the investment that you make into the business that should be at risk, which means you should be able to demonstrate that you will lose that money if the business does not take off. It must be committed. So for instance, you can't just buy a plot of land or a house and say that's my investment. It has to be an active business. The business must be substantial. The business must be something that generates more than just a marginal return for the investor and its family. You need a great business plan, which I'm assuming is not a problem. The source of funds must be legitimate. Gifts are okay, salary is okay, money that you earn in the US is okay, but it should be legitimate. You should be able to identify where you got that money from. Loans cannot be used for the treaty business unless the loans are secured by your own personal assets. So you cannot raise the money on the security of the business. It has to be something that you own. The good thing about the E is the investment amount, the threshold is actually not very high. There is no legal amount that will qualify as the minimum amount for the investment. What you need to establish is that this kind of a business would usually require this amount of capital. So if you're setting up a factory for the production of cars, of course your investment would be in the millions of dollars. But if you're doing a consulting business where all you need is a laptop or just basic, you can get away with a lesser amount of money as well. Generally, people think $100,000 is a good amount, but I think that is the reason we come up with this magic number of 100,000 is some years ago it was there in the fan, and for some reason it's stuck in the minds of most people. But otherwise, even an investment of $40,000 to $50,000 can actually get you an E. The spouse of an E2 can work, which is awesome. You can even use intangible assets. If you're able to value, say you have a patent or a product that you're able to value, that contribution can go towards your capital contribution. Okay, because most people really don't want to do business with their own money, right? That's not smart business. sucks with the E? The biggest problem is whenever you are out ready for looking for funding. Because that's when your stake in the business will get diluted. So the moment your stake is going to fall below 50%, that's when the E will no longer be an applicable solution. There is again, while there is no minimum amount, because there is no minimum prescribed in law, what constitutes as a sufficient investment is often a question of debate, is a question of discretion. And the E does not have a path towards a green card. The E visa requires a foreign national to have a non-immigrant intent. You can be in the US forever, managing your business, but the E will not give you a path to a green card. You'll have to figure out a way to get out of the E into some other option if you actually know the green card. Yeah. Whatever. Let's take them towards the. Let's end that. Because I'm going to do a case study that will hopefully resolve many questions for them. So the intercompany, the L1 visa, intercompany transfer. It's a foreign business can set up an affiliated US business and transfer some of its key employees. This affiliate relationship is actually defined by law, so it's either the foreign company is the holding or the subsidiary, or you have one group of shareholders who own majority stake in both companies. The foreign national must be employed by the overseas company for at least 1 year in the preceding 3 years. This requirement is not negotiable. You can have both an owner of the company or the employee eligible for an E visa, for an L1 visa. And there are some special requirements when you set up an L1 for when you are setting up a new office and trying to get an L1 for an employee for a new office as opposed to an established office. It's critical that you meet the eligibility requirements, particularly the 1 year employment, and that's again a problem with many foreign entrepreneurs because they don't really, they are working but they may not be employed in the strict sense that they are not drawing any salary from the overseas company. We can still work around it, but it just needs a little more creative lawyering. You cannot start your foreign business, shut it down and come here. It's important that both foreign and the US business continue, and documentation of the relationship between the two companies is critical. It's actually a great option for overseas companies because many times you do want your business to have a global presence, and your home country may be a good place to start. And once you start businesses there, and especially because there is no other visa really that is applicable for entrepreneurs or startups directly, you can use it, and at some point of time after a year or two, use to either send your key employees or yourself come here to open a new office. There is no minimum salary requirement again for an L, which is good news. There are no fixed number of visas, so unlike the H-1B, which deals with this huge issue of the cap and the quota and the availability, there are no issues with the L1 on that. If you have a CEO who wants to sort of shuttle between the home country and US, it's a great requirement. As long as your main business continues to be in here, your job requires you to spend a decent amount of time here, you can use it to, you're not prohibited or you're not prevented from going back to your home country and working. And it gives you a much quicker path to a green card than any other non-immigrant visa actually. Unlike we'll talk about green cards a little more, but the EB2s and the EB3 green cards, which can theoretically can take 99 years, the L1 can give you a much quicker path to a green card. And a spouse of an L1 can work, unlike the spouse of an H1. What sucks about it, L1A for owners and small businesses is tougher. It's a lot more documentation, lot more requirements, but it's still possible. The new office L1 regulations, the initial visa that is granted to a new office is only for 1 year. And after this, you have to demonstrate that the business has grown or has sort of moved enough that you will require to hire other people. That's the key here. If the CEO cannot continue to be the only employee in the company. You have to at some point of time grow and get technical. So proving 1 year employment without a salary can sometimes be a challenge. The H-1B. Again, this is the time to apply for H-1Bs. As I said, the quota opens April 1st, and usually last year it got over on April 5th. So there are about 60,000 H-1B visas available, and additional 20,000 visas if you have a master's from the US. So if the quota is oversubscribed, which means if the government receives more number of applications than the number of visas, there's going to be a lottery, and which you may win or may not. Position has to be a specialty occupation. It means that the position should require at least a bachelor's degree. It's not rocket science to figure out that most positions do require a bachelor's degree, but USCIS doesn't get it all the time. For instance, it says that CEOs is not a position which requires a bachelor's degree. So we kind of refrain from using the title of a CEO. I like to call founders business development managers. That's part of what they do, and USCIS buys it better than they buy CEOs. And the visa is tied to the sponsor company, which means, again, I mean, you cannot sort of, you have people who are on an H-1B for years and years, and they want to know whether they can work for another company, whether they can start their own startup stuff. The very strict and the unfortunate answer is no. The H-1B only allows you to work for the company that has filed it. No other company, you are not allowed to work for any other company because you don't have work authorization to do so. Now, I'm kind of limiting my discussion to how the H1s can be used by entrepreneurs. Okay, it's easy enough an option for bigger companies. The key here is that as long as you're able to establish, that is the entrepreneur, that there is an employer-employee relationship between the company and the entrepreneur, the H1 is actually not a bad option. If the company has the money or the funding to pay the H1 salary, and you're able to demonstrate this, the fact that there is someone else who has authority to hire and fire the foreign national, the H-1B can work. And you have to have proof that there is going to be enough work for the duration of the petition, which is not a hard set. So what I like to say is, especially because of say from people from India or China, that what makes an H-1B for a foreign entrepreneur click is a great story. You probably will not have all the elements that you need. You might have a great business plan. You may not have money. You may have money, but you don't have your product yet. But between all your requirements, the idea is to sell a great story. So if you're able to document the relationship between the company and the foreign national, which we'll discuss how, let's say you have a board of directors comprising of US citizens, maybe some investors who are green card holders or permanent residents, anybody whom you think can give a fair, which is a fair idea that there is someone else to whom the foreign national is accountable to. That sort of works to at least try to do an H-1B in an environment for a startup or a small company or for entrepreneurs. You can actually have a part-time H1. So this is another, this will hopefully answer many of the questions that I've received, is that how can I start work for my own company? Well, you have a full-time H1 from company A, and you're able to incorporate company B, maybe along with some other co-founders. Have a part-time H1 done by company B. You can have a full-time H1 and a part-time H1 at the same time. There is nothing that is stopping you from doing it. At least it's a legit way to continue working. You can get paid from the company. You can account for all that money in your tax returns. Because tomorrow, if you're working for a company that is paying you and you're not authorized to do that, it can come back and bite you at some point of time. You'll file green cards, you'll file naturalizations, they'll ask for your tax returns, and if that money is sort of not explained satisfactorily, I don't want to believe it. Did we talk about the H? Yes, of course. We all know H4s cannot work. Thousands of H1 for some unexplained reason are not allowed to work. Now the O1. The O1 is a personal favorite. I like this visa. I think it's really underrated, underutilized, and for all the talent that we have in the valley, this is an awesome option that can be used for entrepreneurs. It is available to an individual who has extraordinary ability in the arts, businesses, and sciences. This is how they define it. And they say, well, either you have a Nobel Prize or a Pulsar or something in that ranking. If not, then you must meet 3 out of a 10 criterion that the regulations have provided. These are that you have received a national or an internationally recognized award. You are a member of an association where membership is restricted to people who have extraordinary ability. You have journals or publications in your field. Your work has been discussed in the media. You have made original contributions, maybe a patent or a scholarly article or any original contribution that you've made in your field of work. You are employed by a prestigious organization in a critical capacity. You are drawing high salary. This sounds very onerous, and it is. I mean, the threshold requirement is really hard, but it's there's surprising creative ways to make sure that this can work for people. I mean, I'm not discounting the fact that it does not require extraordinary ability. It does. But there are different ways that you perceive it, and there are more and more interesting ways of evidencing it or proving it or documenting it and making it meet one of these criteria. So I just want to give you a quick example. Let's talk about publications. Well, publications, researchers have publications, right? Engineers don't. But many coders, many people, they blog, right? And your blog can be viewed by thousands and potentially millions of people. So to my mind, and it's even there in the regulations, that, well, that's a publication, right? It's not in an old-fashioned journal, but it's a publication. And award. You have so many people with PhDs working with companies with great products, great ideas. At some point in their academic life, they qualified for grants. They qualified for prestigious grants, which is an award. It's not traditionally, you don't think of it that way, but I've always looked at a resume, which is about a page or 2 page, and when you come to the O, you can actually make it a 5-page resume, because there is stuff which most people don't think of as fitting one of these traditional parameters of an O1, but you can really work with a lot of stuff that's out there, right? A membership, again, membership in an association. I had a client who of course was extraordinary, but what he did was he had this meetup group of equally extraordinary people that they had formed, that they would get together, brainstorm issues. Well, that's a membership to my mind. Not because, well, they may have formed it themselves, but the fact is that every person in that meetup group was as accomplished or as extraordinary as he was. So the idea here is not to say that one will work over the other. The idea is here to get creative, think big, and you'll be surprised at how much stories can attorneys spin. Okay, so again, there is no quota for the O1s. You can apply anytime. There are unlimited number of visas. There is no restriction on salary. You don't have to pay the prohibitive. I mean, I've had, most people again who are founders, they draw very, less than $30,000 a year, less than $40,000 just to pay themselves living costs. That pretty much works. You can be on an O1 forever. There is no minimum number of years. An O1 can actually be extended indefinitely. And the O1 gives you a much quicker path to a green card. Especially, again, if you're from India and China, you fall under the EB1, that is the first category of green cards, which is where the quota is all, where the availability of visas is always there. So there is a lot of, as I said, I love to spell stories, so there's a lot of room for creative learning. It is hard to prove. I don't want to undermine this. It is the burden of proof is very, very high. And definitely not everyone can qualify. So now we've kind of wrapped up our discussion on the non-immigrant visas. I'm going to quickly run over the immigrant visas too, quickly because they're not always the first options that come to entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs rather would prefer something which is quicker, more easy, cheaper, and gets them here sooner as opposed to waiting years to get a green card. So they are basically the categories that we talk about, the EB ones. EB means employment based. So you have the employment based first, second, third, and the fifth category of visas. The EB ones are again the extraordinary ability workers, sort of mirrors the O1, and the multinational executive and managers, which sort of mirrors the L1. The advantage of both these, the eligibility might sound similar, but the burden of proof is even higher. So if you're contesting for a green card, the burden of proof is much more than what it would be for an O1. But the visas are always available, which means there are no backlogs in the system. So it's you can get a green card within a year, depending on how fast processing time is. EB2s and 3s are the employment-based second preference and the third preference category of visas. EB2 is for people who have a master's degree or the job requires a master's degree. EB3s are for other professionals. The reason I'm quickly working around this is they're not really very useful as an entrepreneur visa. You don't really want to apply for an EB2 and 3 to start your business, but they're out there. And plus, if you have a stake, if you have an ownership stake in your own company, the EB2 and 3s can actually be harder because you might have to prove that the process was fair when the filing process was fair. The EB5 is actually a great option. It's an expensive option, but it is actually, if you're really looking for a long-term way to be here in the US, the EB5 is one of the great immigrant visa options. It's an investor-based green card. So what it requires is the investor invests at least $1 million of their own funds or $500,000 in an investment. The amount of the investment actually depends upon the area where it is in the US. If the investment is in a metropolitan, in a city, it's going to be $1 million. If it's in a targeted unemployment area, the investment amount is $500,000. The business must employ at least 10 US workers full time. The investor is required to be involved in the day-to-day management of the company, which again, if you are not making a direct investment, is sort of flexible. The green card is issued conditionally for 2 years, after which, if the investment meets the conditions, then the conditional green card becomes permanent. It's important to have the source of funds that you own. That has to be legitimate. You have to be able to document that money, where does it come from. You have 2 years to show that all the requirements in immigration have been met. You need a comprehensive business plan. Again, it's sort of, these requirements will mirror the E2 if you see, but the investment, what the investment must generate for the investor to get a green card is very different from the source and the source of the funds. It's a great option. So when you are investing, you have these regional centers. Now, not all investments need to be made in your own business. Let's say if you want to invest $1 million of your own money to set up let's buy a restaurant. That's one way of getting, you can do that and at the same time get a green card, right? The only key is that you have to have $1 million of your own funds. But if you have $500,000, there are regional centers which sort of invest the money for the investor on projects. So what they do is they'll gather funds from say 40 investors. And then the regional center might either invest that money in a huge project themselves, or they might set up a financing company that is investing the money. And so you have bridges, you have airports, you have a lot of construction projects that are actually funded by EB5 money. So investor is getting a green card. The the investor in the sense is who's making the investment of $500,000 is getting a green card, and the people who are managing the project, they're really getting cheap capital. This is not, you can either get a green card and then do your own business, or you can use the same business to get a green card, depending on how you want to go. Again, there's no point, this is the subject matter of an 8-hour discussion, so we won't really get into that. But suffice to say that and the money amount is not as prohibitive as many people feel. Especially again, in China is accounting for almost 80% of the EB5s nowadays, because people have money there. They are keen to move out. India property prices have shot up so much that like 2 or 3 crores is not really too much of an investment money for most people, and it gets you a green card for yourself and your family. Especially people with kids in school. If once you have a green card for the family, the children can come and can study as residents. You don't pay international tuition, F1, you don't have to go through the whole route. So in the long run, it's actually not a very expensive option. So now we'll kind of quickly do a case study, and that will just help us appreciate all the various fact scenarios that we discussed. We have a situation, we have 3 individuals. We have Clemente, he's a French application developer with a bachelor's degree in engineering, wants to do an MBA in the US. We have Mauricio, he's a brilliant hacker. He doesn't have a formal degree in engineering, but he wants to get one in the US. And you have John Paul, a French technologist with a business mindset. He has a bachelor's degree in engineering and is considering a master's. They've worked on an iPhone, on a business in France, bootstrap efforts, money, resources to create a better version, and they've incorporated a business entity in France. This is a very, very common, repetitive, cliched fact pattern that I have. So let's see how we can solve their problems. Clemente and Mauricio enter the US on the visa waiver program. They participate and win $100,000 in a grand hackathon. Now the question is, can they? Because is that prize money? Is that remuneration? Is that what? They incorporate a company in the US while on the visa waiver. They meet some bright people. They meet Chong, he's a Chinese PhD student. He's kind of keen to join the business. They meet Santiago, he's an engineering graduate looking for a job. And they meet Dr. Darren, Chong's advisor, who's a US citizen. And he has contacts with VCs. So now, in the color, you can't make out, but there's some words that I've actually highlighted here, just to get you thinking, and I'll speak them aloud. Now, what's the structure? Who will be the CEO of the company? How little or how much can we invest in the company? I mean, most entrepreneurs would rather get by with as little than more, right? Can we go to grad school? How do we structure payouts, salaries, dividends, and how do we ensure that the business in France continues while it grows in the US? So just some typical questions, very common situations that most people with overseas business are wanting to come and start something here would face. Now, okay, so this slide is not very clear, but let me read out. The first scenario that I have envisaged here is that they do not make any investments, which means they do not make and invest their own money in the business. Okay, this is scenario 1, when they do not invest their own money in the business. What do? Clemente, he goes for an MBA. Mauricio, he just thinks that school is not worth it. And Jean Paul, he's only interested right now to meet VCs, and he gets Dr. Darren on board. Okay, so let's kind of quickly discuss what are the visa options available for them. Clemente, now if you remember, he came on the visa waiver program, right? If he wants to go to school, he cannot change his status to F1. He needs to leave the country, apply for an F1, re-enter. With an F1, he can, because he chose to do an MBA program, he has 12 months of OPT. He can use that OPT to work for their own business that they start now, or later on he has a choice between after his OPT is expired, which are the visa options that are available to him. Anybody knows why the O1 works? He won the hackathon, right? He is someone with extraordinary potential. He's competed at an hackathon where people from all over the world participate. Now going back to the hackathon, winning the award was acceptable. The Foreign Affairs Manual allows prize money as part of the visa. Okay, but incorporating in the US is not something that I personally recommend unless that's the last trip you want to make on your visa waiver program. Which means is that you can come, incorporate, go back, and then decide which visa option you want to use to come back and work. But if you keep doing that without being on the right visa, it's trouble. You have the O1, you have the or you have the H1B. Now, these people, the three of them, have to collectively arrive at a visa situation which not only works for each of them, but which also works for the company as a whole. Right? Now, here, the reason I would rather have Clemente do the H1B than the O is because Mauricio, who does not have a degree in engineering, does not have an H1B option. However brilliant a hacker he is, but the H1 requires you to have a bachelor's degree. So between the two of them, Mauricio is much better going for the O1, and O1s are harder in any case. Why would I want a situation for two O's? Let me have one doing an H and one doing an O. John Paul is great on a B1 right now or a visa waiver program. At some point of time, he can switch on the H1. Now, why does the H1B be easier here? The reason is because now that they've managed to get Dr. Daring, a US citizen, on board, they are more likely to establish an employer-employee relationship between the company and the investors, sort of more conducive to an H1B. And maybe they don't have money, or maybe they're able to get some funding, but at least the structure of the business is such that it can support an H1B relationship between the foreign national and the employer. Now, anybody, why can the E2 not work for them? They haven't made any investments. They haven't invested their own money. So if you're not investing, if you're not making any investment in the business, the E2 is not going to work, right? Problems with H1B can, again, salary could be a problem. We discussed because they must be paid a certain salary. But we did hopefully resolve the issue of an employer-employee relationship by getting an investor or a board advisor. Now, the second situation that I have sort of put forward here, they still don't invest any money, but they do things a little differently. Clemente, he drops his plan for school. Mauricio decides to opt for formal education. But look at what John Paul does. He gets VC funding, but he gets them from France. Okay? So, can you hear me? Yeah, that's fine. So now with Mauricio, now he can't join school unless he finishes his engineering, but he does have 29 months of OPT after he completes his program to work and grow their business. But now, Clemente is a French national. The funding that they've got is from France. Now, as long as 50% of this company is owned by French nationals, Clemente will be eligible for the E2 visa. So even though he's not got his own money here, but what is important to remember is the nationality of the company is French. Simply because 50% of the company is owned by French, because the VCs here are French. Now, as he can be an E-employee. But, okay, Mauricio, he has an OPT. He can continue to have a minor stake in the company while on OPT. That's not a problem. But, is there a problem if Mauricio wants to come on the E2? Why? Because Mauricio is also an Italian national. US has a treaty with Italy. Both Clemente and Mauricio could technically be eligible for the E. But the problem is, two people can only be, a company can have a dual nationality only if nationals of both companies have equal ownership and stake. So only if Mauricio and Clemente both have 50% ownership in the company and sort of both can oust each other, we call that negative control. That's the only situation the E works for them, which obviously will not uh, so between now again, sorry, John Paul was also French, right? Yeah. So Clemente, French, and the VC funding and the VC investor, the three of them together have to have 50% in the business for both of them to be eligible for an visa. John Paul can come on EY because he's a French national, or he has an option. He can come after a year on L1 as long as the two businesses are affiliated with each other. So he's done his job, he's got them a French VC, he can continue to be in France and continue to manage the business from there. Now, it's the reason I use the French VC and not a US. Had the VC been from the US, okay, this whole e-visa option would not have been available for anybody. So this sort of explains, if you are an investor and you're initially evaluating to come venture capitalists, you would not think about the nationality of the venture capitalist for your visa requirements, right? You're coming here to get funding. You're not, that's the reason most people are here. But just the fact that the venture capitalist is French is actually changing the whole game because it's giving you options which you would otherwise have not considered. So for the E, it's important to remember that the nationality is a separate requirement from ownership and control. So while the business has to be owned by the nationals of the country, the same nationals do not have to control it. So in this case, the VC funding of investor, whoever your group is, they just by virtue of contributing to the business, they have given the business the French nationality. But they need not necessarily control the business. The control can still continue to remain with Clemente and John Paul. So there are pretty creative and interesting ways that you can structure businesses just to ensure that everybody's happy. So the second scenario, the trio invest your own money in the business. Now what are your visa options? You can actually have E2 for all, so long as business is owned and controlled equally by nationals of both treaty countries, which means that Mauricio will actually have a 50% stake and John Paul and Clemente will have a combined 50% stake, which may not be an acceptable situation. So that then the need is not good. You can do one can have an H1 as long as you have, one is actually, one director on board is really the minimum number. We would ideally like more. And we do not want an H1 holder to have a majority stake in the company. Again, it comes the question of whether really the H1 employee can be hired or fired by the company. That's sort of the O1s are focused, as I said, they're focused more on the individual and less on the company. So O1s can be available for both hackathon winners. John Paul can do L1 after a year, may shuttle between US and France as long as majority of the time he's working in the US. And in all the potential scenarios, Santiago, who was their Mexican buddy, he can actually work with them on a TN. I think I didn't elaborate on a TN visa. So the TN visa is another non-immigrant visa category. It's sort of similar to the H1B in the sense that it is also available to people for a position that requires a specialty occupation, a bachelor's degree. But TN is only available to Canadians and Mexicans. Canadian nationals and Mexican nationals. There is no quota on the TNs, unlimited number of visas available. It's a good option for those Canadian nationals, Mexican nationals who miss the H1B quota bus. But the TN does not give you an intent to immigrate. So H1 is a dual intent visa. With an H1B, you are allowed to have an intention to immigrate. But with the TN visa, you can be on the TN forever, but you cannot have the intent to immigrate. But it's a great option to the H1 because again, it is no. So that's pretty much the end of the presentation, but not material. You can drop your business cards. You have free 45-minute consultation, which will be valid for the next 6 months. There's a lot of, I have a brand new website that's up. There's a lot of information, lot of videos, practical insights, more. Feel free to send me email if you have any about your questions, and I hope you found this useful. Thank you. Yes.
L1A and L1B, which one is the better option? And if we have to start applying, when is a good time to start applying for L1A?
So L1A is a visa for executives and managers. That essentially means you are either managing a team of people or you are supervising over a function. L1B is a visa for specialized knowledge employees. So it essentially means that the employee is attributed to a knowledge which either of the company's products or practices or something which is not easily available outside. So let's say just a good example is if you have developed the prototype of your product, then you are an L1B employee, simply because the knowledge that you have of the product will not easily be available outside. Whereas a manager is someone who's managing a team of people. So there's really two different kind of visas, but if you're using a visa to sort of move here or using it to immigrate, the L1A may be a better option. The total period that you can be on the US on an L1A is 7 years. The total period that you can be in the US on an L1B is 5. And L1B does not give you a path to a green card like in terms of the EB1. The EB1 is only available if you're an L1A employee. For L1B employees, you'll have to go through the traditional EB2 or 3 route, which if you are again a person from India or China, 5 years is probably not enough to get a green card. Oh, it's definitely not enough. And there is no way that your L1B will be extended. Unlike an H1, because an H1 can continue to be extended if you have a pending green card, right? But an L1B, you cannot extend the L1B. You just get 5 years. So you'll have to pretty much... Yes, you can. But again, you have a total time of... You can be in the US on an H1 for 6 years, right? And whatever time you spend on L1B gets reduced from that. So if you already have spent 5 years on L1B, you'll only be left with 1 year on H1. For you to start your green card process and get it to a stage at which you can extend your H1.
And when is the right time?
You can apply for the L1 anytime. There is no right or wrong time. I mean,
How long does it take for people?
it depends. In terms of the government processing, actually currently L1s are taking just about a month, which is pretty quick. Usually it wasn't. You still have the option to pay the government an extra amount to expedite your case if you want a response within 15 days. But since regular processing is taking about 30 days, you may not have the need to expedite it. Yes.
Sorry, two questions. One, can a small company file L1A, and it's a job description.
So small companies, yes, owners, small businesses can file an L1. They're just a little harder in terms of the documentary requirements and stuff. It's more extensive. What was your next question? I'm sorry. The job description has to be, for an L1A, you either have to be a manager or you have to be an executive. Which executive means you're managing a function. For a small company, until very recently, the L1 executive position was almost suicidal. They wouldn't really buy the argument. But we've had recent amendment, positive amendment in case law, where L1s for executive functions for small companies have also been upheld. So definitely, I mean, it's small companies, the regulations specifically provide that, small companies can take advantage of L1s. But again, as long as you're able to document that the person is going to be managing over people, maybe outside contractors. So you don't necessarily have to manage full-time employees. You can even manage contractors, vendors, third parties. It's definitely a possibility. Okay, so how do I? Okay, we'll start here. Take more, yeah.
I'm on B2 visa.
Which visa?
B2.
Okay.
And I'm switching to F1.
Okay.
But I wonder, can I register a company or incorporate?
On the B2?
Yeah,
on the B1?
B2.
Okay. You can actually incorporate. I'm kind of a little conservative. I would rather not go ahead and have someone incorporate the company. The other reason is when you're incorporating, there is a part of the process for incorporations that require you to give your social security numbers for incorporators and stuff, and most people on B1s will not really have a social. So I would also suggest you should speak with an attorney who does incorporations, because they sometimes they act as incorporators on your behalf and do that. But regardless, even if you incorporate, you definitely want to not be working for it. You can incorporate the company, maybe leave, but come back on the right visa whenever you're ready to work for the company.
Yeah, but do they think I have intention to immigrate if I'm incorporating on B2?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the intent to immigrate. Yeah. But intent to immigrate is a combination of a lot of factors. So they are all read individually. I'll take each one of them, yes.
My question is about just getting an H1B or a green card in a petition to company.
Reputation to a certain, it should be a bona fide petition. It does not mean that a small company can't file one, or a big only the big ones are successful. As long as you show that your case is genuine, there is work for the company. We've done H1s even for 2-member companies, 3-member companies. That by itself does not disqualify you from applying an H1.
For H1B holders, if you want to apply for O1,
O1,
do you have any problems with staying with your employer? Like when, let's say that you get O1.
You can actually continue to work for your employer on the O1 too.
And can I use the fact that I have O1 later to be with my employer and apply for a green card?
If your employer, yes, you can.
Okay.
You can.
Because I cannot apply by myself for a green card, right?
EB1, extraordinary ability, you can.
Okay.
You can self-petition too, but it's always nicer to have a company petition for you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going order-wise and I'll take all. Okay, yeah.
So you say that I apply on April for H1B and I got it in April H1B. How much time does it pass between you get the H1B until you apply for the green card?
You can, once you start working for the company can start working, the company can file your green card at any time. They can, you don't have to wait for any minimum number of time. They can actually start working on your green card even before you've joined them, because the H1 and the green card are two entirely different processes. One has nothing to do with the other.
How long does it take to apply for the green card until you get the green card?
That is a question that depends on that depends on your nationality first and foremost, depends on where the visa bulletin is. It can be a long process. Yes.
So depends on the company, citizen or green card, right? Is it possible for me to get a part-time H1 visa and be also a part-time with the company,
Again, co-founder H1s, if you're able to demonstrate employer-employee relationship, you can. But you can definitely be on part-time. You can be on part-time H1 with a company and full-time on another. That's also not a problem. Okay, I'll take some from this side now.
So just to draw a parallel of the hackathon, the million. So let's say you raise money from a VC, so 1 million. Is it realistic to be pursuing O1 in this case, or is it better to take an
No, again, that by itself cannot be a criteria for you to get your O1. But if you have a great business, let's say you've developed a prototype which can be called an original contribution in the field, and you have a VC which has supported the idea by $1 million, yes, it sort of goes on to show your capabilities as an entrepreneur. The thing about the O1 is that you never know what one fact, unless it's an extraordinary achievement that stands out by itself, it's hard to identify whether that particular thing will help you get the O1. So it's usually a combination of, let's say if you have a good product and the product is talked about in TechCrunch or other magazines, you can use to show that there is media, buzz around the product and supported by VC funding.
Under what status can you work on that product? So let's say you're not hired.
The O1. No, yeah, I mean, if you need a status or you need a work permit to be able to get that product up to. So it's again many factors that go into play. Yes.
So if you've already got one, let's say once you get a master's in science, and you get an OPT period, then a couple of years later you go down and do an MBA, and you get another OPT. Do you get a second OPT once you've got one master's degree?
If you're upgrading, it has to be like a successive. Your education scale should be increasing. If you're doing undergrad, you'll get OPT. Then if you do an MBA, you'll get an OPT. But if you sort of adding to the same level, no.
So a master's in science and a master's in business, is it considered the same or is it like?
A master's in science and a master's in, they're two separate businesses. I have to check that out. But you will only get one STEM regardless. However many science programs you do, you only get one STEM. But a 12 month you should. I think if you're doing an MBA once, that MBA will give you 12 months. If you're doing an engineering program, you will get separate 12 months for that. But you won't get STEM for both. STEM you'd only get once for one program. Yeah.
What's the price of your steps? How do you price your steps?
I will not discuss this at this forum. You can send me a separate email. Yes. You have I have visiting cards here. Feel free to take something. Yes.
For D1, you need, for example, get shares in the company and do that. We like to country, and then what you do for this company through your own consulting business.
So shares in, well, yes, you are a passive investor. You can invest in shares of any company, right? You can, that's not a problem. But if you're not working in the US, right? If you're working outside, that's a separate arrangement. You only need a visa if you're working in the US. Your company here, if you are providing consultancy services here to your company from overseas, that's fine. That's okay. That's acceptable. The company will probably issue you. Pardon me?
You still need to come to the US to work with this.
No, but then you are engaging in employment here. No. Let's say you're principally you're working there. You're not being paid by the US company. You're being paid there, not for services here. You come here to do meetings and go back, right? So that's accept. Maybe the company here is only paying living, boarding, only paying your expenses. It's not paying you any salary.
But I might own shares.
You might own shares. It's kind of questionable whether. So I would say that as long as you are coming here for an incidental purpose of meeting your teammates, meeting someone for short periods and going back, having shares in a company is fine. Anybody can own shares in any company. That's acceptable. But keep your stay here to as little as possible, only for the limited purpose, and go back and work from there. That probably would be an acceptable situation. Yes.
So you said if you are Canadian or Mexican, you can work on TN visa.
Yes.
But can you also get unique sponsorship? Can you also get salary?
Yes, you can absolutely. You can get salary in the US. The US company will pay you.
But do you need sponsorship for TN visa?
Yes, you can't be self-employed on TN.
So who will sponsor you?
Any company which is willing to hire you.
If you are, or if you want.
You cannot do self-sponsoring on a TN. So the TN in this case, if you notice, was only for the friend who wanted to work for the company. He had nothing to do with being an equity participant in the company. It's only just to work. No self-employment. Yes.
If you're an H1B, if you're a full-time H1B, and in parallel you want to incorporate the company makes money, but you don't pay yourself. Okay?
This is, if you have incorporated, you are a passive investor, right? So just because you don't get paid for a position does not make that acceptable. Okay, so you are working for the company. If you're a passive investor, you have nothing to do. You don't work. You don't attend meetings. You don't take part in the organization of the company. That's fine. But if you're working for the company, not being paid does not make it acceptable.
So this is part-time H1B.
You need a part-time H. You need a work permit to work for the company.
Part-time you have to find it in first year.
If you already been part of the H1 quota once, then no. Then you can file it at any time. So the quota, incidentally, is only for those people who've never been on the H1. Once you move to the H1 quota, then you are exempt from that requirement. Then you can pretty much move around or transfer anytime during the year.
This is a question. Before, for example, could you the company where you pays additional for another H1B part-time?
You can do that. So if you are employed by company A, which is probably not your own company, and now you want to work on your own company, you can have your own company do a part-time H1 for you, and that will be exempt from the quota because you've already been part of the H1 quota. You already have an H1. Yes, you can. You can have one full-time and one part-time. Yes, there are part-time salary limits. There are limits too. But again, because you're part-time, you will be paid for half the time. You're not making full-time salary, right? But there are still minimum limits that you have to be paid.
The second question, my wife has age 4, and can I hire
Yes. Yes.
So I have to open H1B, for example, part-time H1B for her, and she
She will have to pass through a quota because she's never been on the H1 before. But that company can hire her on a part-time H1. But you will not go through the quota because you've already got an H1.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Anup, you mentioned that self-employment is okay.
Yes.
Do you need to register a company or you can be?
Register meaning no, you have to incorporate the company.
Can I freelance with companies like online on freelancer.com?
On OPT, yes. I mean, you're not talking about the 17 months STEM thing, right? The 12 months. You can, whichever company you're freelancing with or whatever, as you can even be unpaid with them as long as they are able to establish that you were engaged in a work program or whatever. That's acceptable. You already had a question. I'm sorry. Yes.
5 more minutes. I'm on my OPT and I want to incorporate. Is it easy to get the American status?
Yeah, that's pretty simple. Yeah.
And then you get an H1B after.
After what?
If I'm a foreigner, I have an OPT, and then I start a company, and then it gets e-verified. Can I continue with an H1B?
You can, but again, you have to get an H1 approved through that company. So, which is, if you're the only member in that company, then it can be challenging. You need to sort of partner with someone else if possible.
That full-time H1B with a company, and then you want to create your own company, a part-time. Does it have to be with the industry that you study?
I didn't get your question actually.
So, if you study engineering, do you have to have the H1B visa for company?
Yes, for an engineering position, not an engineering company, but the H1, the position has to match your educational background. So if you want to do music or something, that will not get you an H1.
Okay, so I have an Indeed visa. Green card process has just started. I want to know soon I can get into opening a company or any sort of company. It could be a restaurant, it could be a radio company, it could be anything.
So if you strictly read the visa bulletin, it's a general, it's a joke actually. So if you read, it said that if you assume that the visa bulletin will go exactly the way, it means there are no fallouts, nobody moves from one category to the other, the unutilized numbers don't get spelled out. The current predictions are EB3 India will take 99 years. Okay, so that's not how it actually happens because, you know, people file, they withdraw, things move. But there's really nothing and no one who can really give you an estimate of how long. That's really, really unfortunate about India and China. So unless there is some really reform, you either just, as I said, find a way to partner with someone with a US company and do a part-time H, but there's really nothing No solution that I can offer for that. It just depends on, so how the visa bulletin moves is something which only the Department of State governs. Nobody else can do anything about that process. Okay, the visa bulletin moves according to the number of, so that's a whole complex mathematical game that we don't need to get into, but really nobody can tell you how that bulletin will move. So that is what will decide the speed with which you get your green card, which is not something that any of us can actually control.
So I'm on a student visa. I have a friend, and I want to open company now. So is it possible for me to get into it, or
You have your friend incorporate a company, build it to a point at which it can sponsor your part-time H1 or full-time H1.
oh,
Yes.
and if, like as I said, I'm on start of the GC process. So how soon I can get into the field where I can? Is it like an EAD?
Talk to me outside. Let's take more questions here. Yes. See, again, the H4 thing is, that's again several questions came on H4. H4 holders can have passive investments. Again, as long as you're not, it's just a passive, you're an equity stakeholder in a company and you have nothing to do with it. It's just like you buy Google, Apple shares in the market and have nothing to do with it. That's exactly the way an H4 can have. My very strict, it's not actually a strict, it's a commonsensical approach that I take is that just because you did not get paid does not make that position voluntary. If you were, you just continue to work on the understanding that this job will be available to you sometime in the future. Whenever you have an EAD, you are being paid, not in terms of monetary compensation, but you are getting consideration for that, right? So H4s can do things like what? You can work in the library, you can do community projects, you can get involved with your child's schoolwork or whatever. But you cannot work for a position which would otherwise be full-time and available to someone who would be paid for it. Yes.
For Indians who has a dependent visa or investment visa, provide a way to start.
There is no investment visa. I mean, the only investment visa we actually have for Indians is the EB-5. And again, as I said, the dependent visa, that's exactly the question that I answered. That it's the same. Yes, yes. There is nothing like a startup visa.
So I'm on an H1. If I want to do something part-time as well, does the part-time H1 also have to be from my field of study, or can it be from secondary?
No. It has to be from your field of study.
So you said if somebody has been on an H1 once, then they don't have to fall under the cap. But do they have to be cap counted the first time?
So if they were cap counted the first time and they have not used the full 6 years of H1 allotted to them, then they are exempt from the cap the next time. So now you will not be subject to the cap, which means you can apply anytime.
And some of them never cap counted, but they still have some time left over.
You can use that leftover time. That's about it.
All right, last question. Anybody?
Can we claim this membership in this meetup as a O1?
You can try.
Yes. Okay. I mean, H1 is a relatively simpler visa. If the company, you mean chances as in terms of what is the chances that you make through the lottery? That really is a game that we love to play every year. We haven't started playing it yet, but nobody knows how many visas. So it's also interesting, the 60,000 number is not really the exact number. So there is a number that is reserved for Chile and Singapore every year. You subtract that number, you add the unutilized number from Chile and Singapore for last year. So it's, as I said, it's a number game.
For L1A, is there any salary restriction?
No, but it has to be respectful. But there is no minimum salary that you have to pay. Yes.
Okay, last question.
For a new company to sponsor a part-time H1, they want to be part
So for a new company to sponsor someone's H1B part-time, are there any requirements?
I mean, yes, there has to be a bona fide job offer. Again, as I say, you build a good story. Minimum wage always depends on what the position is and where the company is located. So just to give you an example, minimum wage for Santa Clara County for a software engineer is about $85,000, right? Part time would be about 40. I mean, just would be half, yeah. So you can do it. It's the minimum wage is also calculated per hour. So you can do 20 hours a week, 15, 18 hours a week, depending on whatever you're doing. Yes, that's it.
All right. Yeah. So now, time for prizes. First of all, of course, the raffle which Sweta said she's going to give away. So these are some of the business cards we got. So select who is the lucky guy. Will get personal consultation with Sweta. So if you have so many questions, let's see.
So this is
Ying Chen. All right. Can you hear some? Come on. So do you want to like give her your card or?
yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Picture with Sweta.
So I'm doing that 45 minutes for
That's right.
Okay, thank you. This is when I everything.
So picture.
Oh.
All right, and we have 3 more prizes based on the creative tweets we received for American Dream. The first one is very interesting. A better life for my family. American Dream by Jesh. Is Jesh here tonight? All right. So, Grace. Shalish.
Yeah.
Oh, you're here. Okay, so we have this Munchies gift bag for you.
So we have this. Let me just give a.
Yes.
So Munchies is a product that's being launched by a person, Susan Moskowitz, and she was a class member of ours when we were classmate of ours when we were at Stanford Ignite. Okay. And so she couldn't be here today, but these are the prizes for her. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Picture.
Picture. Thank you.
Very good. So Susan is also one of the Stanford Igniter. She was also a batchmate, but unfortunately she had to leave today for some domestic emergency. The second prize is it's not like in order, but the next prize is by IRU, Humble Beginning, Ambitious Climb, Glorious Summit. So fantastic write-up on American Dream. Are you here tonight? All right, come on.
Picture. Yeah, of course. There you go. All right. American Dream. Thanks.
Good job. And the third one is Anushri Venki. Follow your passion, make a difference. That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
All right. And so that's all the prizes. And this is our next event in March. Mike Musidini is a New York Times bestseller author and chairman of referral company. He's a fantastic speaker who is going to talk next meetup. And this is something exciting I wanted to talk to you before you guys leave. We're going to have an Igniters moment from next meetup onward. So if you're one of the regular members of this meetup, and if you have a startup you want to talk about or present your idea, you can come on in here, 3 of you, and we'll have like 5 minutes for each of you, and you can tell about your startup, your idea, so that way we can know each other better and make this community much richer. And that's all we have. We have got some beer in the back, so I hope you guys will stay a bit longer and have some beer. And Sweta will also be here to field some of your questions. And have a nice Friday evening.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. You can take a card.